Because, by the Reverend Gretchen Haley.
Because this day teeters between summer and fall.
And already it's time to prepare.
Because winter is coming.
Because this life holds both tragedy and possibility.
And beckons to each of us with a bright and insistent urging.
Yet insufficient reassurance that anyone is in charge.
Or has a plan.
Or has anything at all under control.
Because we arrive here with questions and worries, and yet still a stubborn joy and persistent sense of wonder and awe.
That life remains mostly beautiful, and there is so much being born even now.
Because we want to be partners in this grand experiment.
Co-creators, comforters,
challengers, and caretakers.
Because we do not want to miss out on this one life.
For all these reasons, we gather together here,
humble and harried.
But here, willingly offering all of it, even ourselves, for the good.
For the common good, which is not a forgotten idea.
That our gathering might bring more wisdom and courage and strength.
That we might keep on with this journey of life and love.
That we might, together, find our way home.
Come, let us worship together.
Welcome to the Unitarian Church of Lincoln on this Sunday morning. My name is the Reverend Oscar Sinclair. Every week, since the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, our congregation has continued to gather, and that gathering has looked like many things. At times it's been here in person at 6300, at times it's been pre-recorded, at times it's been on Zoom. On this service, we are live streaming on YouTube. And we're doing this for the first time. In this room, there are 5 of us gathered, all distanced from each other, all wearing masks unless we are speaking. And what's happening here is being broadcast about 5 seconds later, live. This is the first time we're doing this, so bear with us when there are inevitably technical hiccups. But worship in Unitarian Universalism at this church is a chance to proclaim what we are, who we are, and what we are about in the world. As we throw open our metaphorical doors to the congregation and proclaim the radical love and welcome that is at the heart of this community. We say that the Unitarian Church of Lincoln aspires to be a loving community, uniting reason with spiritual exploration to transform ourselves and the world. That remains true today. It will remain true, whether in person, online, or in some way of being together that we cannot yet imagine. But for now, there is work to be done. So we will begin with our prelude. We begin services in this faith by lighting a flaming chalice. And so if wherever you are, you have a chalice or a candle nearby, please light it with these words from our children. We light this chalice to celebrate Unitarian Universalism. We are a church of open minds. We are a church of loving hearts. We are a church of helping hands. Together, we care for our earth and work for justice and peace in our world.
Our story today is called The Boy and the Sea by Camille Andros. Once there was a boy who lived by the sea. The sea was old and wise. The boy liked to listen to its whispers. From time to time, the sea was dark and dangerous. So was the boy. Other times, the sea was tranquil and tender. And so was the boy. But once in a while, the sea felt the pull of something more, and the boy did too. The boy liked to think, and often his thoughts turned into questions, and some of his questions had answers, but many did not. So he returned to the waves and their whispers. The boy sat and listened, and he thought that he heard the sea say, "Dream." So he did, from time to time. It felt dark and dangerous, and other times it felt tranquil and tender. But once in a while, the boy felt the pull of something more. As the boy grew, his questions became more complicated. Answers were fewer and farther between. So he returned to the waves and their whispers. The boy sat and he listened. And he thought he heard the sea say, "Love." So he did. From time to time, it felt dark and dangerous. And other times it felt tranquil and tender. But once in a while, the boy felt the pull of something more. And then the boy was grown. He thought by being grown he'd finally know the answers to his questions, but he did not. He only knew more was answered in his asking. So he returned to the waves and their whispers and asked. The boy sat and he listened, and he thought he heard the sea say, "Be." From time to time, it felt dark and dangerous, and other times it felt tranquil and tender. And once in a while, the boy felt the pull of something more. Once there was a boy who lived by the sea. The boy was old and wise. He liked to think, and often his thoughts turned into questions. Some of his questions had answers, but many did not. So the boy sat and he listened. And that is the end of our story.
Hello, Unitarian Universalists. This is the season of Ingathering, marking the start of a new congregation year. In recent months, as more people have been able to get vaccinated, many of us have been able to gather in ways that we haven't for a long time. It has been a joy to gather with distant loved ones, to hug our family and friends. And it's important to savor these gifts, these blessings. And we know that the pandemic is not over. Virus variants are creating uncertainty and greater risks for our children, the immunocompromised, and those who cannot get vaccinated. If you are eligible, please get vaccinated. This is the most important thing you can do to keep your loved ones, your communities, and one another safe. Getting vaccinated and continuing to wear masks remain a priority. And they help make our gatherings, whenever and whatever form they take, as safe and welcoming as possible for our children, for our elders, and for those most at risk. I share the feelings of frustration that we are not further along in combating this virus. And I know the heartache and confusion of trying to figure out how to best care for the spiritual nourishment of our communities while the virus surges. The way forward will be different across our communities. Rates of vaccination, case counts, ability to meet outside, quality of ventilation, ability to physically distance indoors, congregation size, and particular needs and risks of our staff, our leaders, and our members, all of these can vary, and all are important factors in planning how we gather. I'm encouraged, though. I'm so encouraged by the creativity I witness in our congregations and the way that we are all leaning into mission, remembering how much our families and elders need community. It's important to think outside the box and to experiment with ways of gathering, both virtually and in person, that are meaningful and that attend to safety. In this time of ingathering, this season of new beginnings, care, kindness, and patience for ourselves and others are needed in abundance. Remember to prioritize the values of inclusion and consent, centering those most at risk, and to follow the science and be flexible in making plans and changing them when needed. At its core, ingathering is a ritual that celebrates the value and the meaning of religious community, the ways that we are held by a wider circle of love and care. I invite you to take a moment to be present to your body, and the physical space in which you are present. Be open to the emotions that you carry in your spirit. And remember that you are not alone. We belong to each other. And even when we are apart, we are held by a greater love. We are held by a religious community and by people that comfort us and care for us, and remind us of our connection to the larger interdependent web of which we are all a part. May we be grateful for the unseen but very real threads of compassion and strength, care and intention that surround us. There is great healing and sustaining power in our faith. And our work is to make these manifest in ourselves and in our communities, even if how we do this looks and continues to look differently than it did before. Our ministry is life-saving when it is responsive to our realities, helping all of us navigate these unprecedented and very precarious times. Thank you for being a part of this faith and for your commitment to your UU congregation. We will get through this together, caring for one another and being held by the larger embrace of abiding love. I send you my blessings to you and your loved ones and your families and to your communities. My love and care to each and every one of you. Blessed be.
We are Unitarian Universalists. We are people of many paths who are brave, curious, and compassionate thinkers and doers. Every day,
the Unitarian Church of Lincoln plays an important role in the lives of our members and friends, in addition to the broader community, through the ways that we show up. One way we show up is through assistance from our church discretionary fund. Today, since it is an ingathering, all donations for our Sunday plate will go towards the discretionary fund. We replenish this fund several times throughout the year and use the fund to show up in ways like paying an electric bill or rent, purchasing gas, and grocery gift cards. To give, you can text UC Lincoln and the amount you wish to give to 73256. Again, you can text UC Lincoln and the amount you wish to give to 73256. Or you can send a physical check to the church at 6300 A Street. Thank you for your generosity.
Up until about 2, maybe 3 weeks ago, this service was on our calendar as water communion, as ingathering, where we marked the beginning of a year after time apart over the summer, and in a broader sense, time apart over the last year and a half of pandemic. Water communion each year is a time to come together and share the experiences of our lives. We had these to share, memories of the COVID-19 pandemic that have been accumulating over the old altar in our gallery. But life intervenes. This is not the ingathering that we had planned to do. And so as we move into our time for joys and sorrows, I'll start just with a sorrow that despite the magnificent technology that we are using this morning, we are not gathered together in this room. That is a real loss. and a joy that despite that, we are gathered in this space, this live-streamed online space. So as this next song plays, a nod to the water imagery so often used at Ingathering, take some time in the chat room to share the joys and sorrows of your life, both in the last week, but also more broadly. How is it with your soul, beloveds? One of the things that I've been drawn to in thinking about how to do worship in this time of continued isolation, of loneliness, of connection above all things within this community. I keep getting drawn back to the idea of including prayer in these services. And I know we've been around this plenty of times. But rather than begin the year with a prayer, begin the year with a poem by Eric Danielson entitled Prayer Language. A buddy asked about the condition of my prayer life. I had no idea what to tell him, so while my mouth hung slightly open, I reviewed my memories of the past 24 hours. I wrote 1,000 words yesterday, hopeful one would find a friend. It's always okay to ask for help, I told my son, pouring concrete between our present and future selves. My head bobbed in time to a song by the National. I even played B-flat, B minor, G, D, A on my air guitar, then I flinched when the singer promised not to ruin everything. My eyes traced the contours of a Scott Cairns poem, then closed in worship to read between the lines. I challenged every father's fear of failure to an arm wrestling match, then exclaimed, "Jesus," both an expletive and an appeal for strength. I stared at the thumbnail of a Rothko painting and memorized the blue. I scrubbed my bare arms and chest with green soap, baptizing another day's shame and watching it cascade down the drain. Using soft kisses to plot points, I drew a map on my wife's collarbone, then leaned back to examine the legend. Over the course of the day, I sighed something like 32 times. I pray without ceasing, I told my friend, and considered the matter settled.
The Lake Isle of Innisfree by William Butler Yeats. I will arise and go now, and go to Innisfree, and a small cabin built there, of clay and wattles made. 9 bean rows will I have there, a hive for the honey bee, and live alone in the bee-loud glade. And I shall have some peace there, for peace comes dropping slow, dropping from the vales of the morning to where the cricket sings. Their midnights all a glimmer and noon a purple glow, and evening full of the linnet's wings. I will arise and go now, for always night and day. I hear lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore. While I stand on the roadway or on the pavement's gray, I hear it in the deep heart's core.
So here we are, gathered at the start of a new congregational year. I say gathered, of course, meaning something very different than I have up until last year. This morning, 4 or 5 of us are gathered around live streaming equipment in this building while we broadcast our worship service on YouTube for our distanced community. So let me be clear at the outset, this is not the start of the congregational year that we imagined. Last April, we began the slow process of re-entering our building after a year of pandemic. And as much as we talked in hypothetical terms about the possibility of reversing the process, it was not a possibility that I or many others spent much time on, especially as we ended last congregational year with cases nearing single digits, masks taken off, and vaccines rapidly becoming commonplace. Alas, simply thinking about a possibility, not thinking about a possibility, doesn't make it less likely. I should have rewrote that sentence. Over the last month, cases have risen sharply here in Lancaster County. The City County Health Department has reimposed a mask mandate indoors, and hospitals here in Lincoln have reached capacity. And this, especially that last reason, means that we begin the year like this, live streaming on YouTube. And the real worry that plenty of us share is that this building, being gathered together in worship in one place, might become like Yeats's lake house in Innisfree, a dappled subject of daydreams in the mundane, gray, day-to-day life of a pandemic. Our worship theme for the month of September is embracing possibility, and I confess this was a theme chosen in more optimistic times. But the part of embracing possibility to talk about today is embracing that, as Gretchen Haley puts it, this is a time to prepare. Winter is coming, and life holds both possibility and tragedy. This week, we intended to welcome our affiliate community minister, Reverend Kimberly Debus, to Lincoln to join us for our Ingathering service this weekend. Reverend Debus was last in Lincoln for Ingathering in 2018, and we had actually planned on her coming out here in May of 2020. This is the second time we've had to wave that visit off. Still, online worship does have some advantages, not least of which is this: we are not bound by the simple limits of geography. So it is a pleasure to welcome Kimberly to our service and to hear her wisdom as we gather at the start of the year.
Way back in May of 2020, just a couple of months into what none of us expected to be such a long haul, I had the opportunity to speak with you on a Sunday morning about long-term isolation. I mentioned Dr. Kimberly Norris, an authority on confinement and reintegration at the University of Tasmania, and the work that she and others do on long-term isolation. They study long-term missions to space, to Antarctica, to other remote regions. And what they understand is that humans move through 4 psychological stages or quarters. The first quarter, of course, is disorienting. What is this? How are we supposed to do it? There's panic and loneliness and confusion as we learn how to be in this new isolated environment. And then we ease into the second quarter. We get used to everything. We find the novelty and special things about it. We think, yeah, we can do this. And hey, this is kind of cool. Maybe I'll just stay here. Then just over halfway through, the second quarter shifts into the third, the critical and perhaps most difficult quarter, where the loneliness creeps back in and we become irritated and brooding as we wonder how we'll ever make it to the end. That's where we were in May of 2020. We thought we were in the third quarter with the end in sight, with the fourth quarter of preparing to return, getting things set and ready, and starting to see our reintegration into what we called our normal lives. The problem with the third quarter is that there is what Norris calls the A factor, or the Antarctica factor. You see, humans may decide on an end date for a mission to an Antarctic research center, but there's no guarantee that the weather will cooperate. There may be ice flows that prevent ships from coming in, or significant storms that keep planes from landing. And so those end dates shift up to 3 or 4 months. Rarely does a third quarter last over a year. As Gretchen Haley wrote, life beckons to each of us with a bright and insistent urging, yet insufficient reassurance that anyone is in charge, or has a plan, or has anything at all under control. Is it any wonder we feel adrift in this endless third quarter? We feel frustrated, ornery. Everyone's a jerk, and so are we. Nothing makes sense anymore. We want to go back to the way it used to be, but the used to be was so long ago we struggle to remember. And for those who are in medical care or public safety or education, or yes, even religious institutions such as ours, our lack of control is even more present, more wearing, more frustrating. We are burned out. It feels terrible, right? It's exhausting. This long third quarter with occasional glimmers of a return date that gets snatched back from us by rising infection rates, again, wears us down, again, wears us out. In my community ministry, I spend many hours each week consulting with ministers, music directors, and religious educators, helping them focus on one worship service or many, offering inspiration, resources, direction. When those happen in the spring, hearing how tired everyone is, well, is expected. Every church year is a marathon, and the finish line is our journey to a new city for our General Assembly. But there has been no real finish line, no place to cross it, certainly, except the same room we've been in all this time. And this August, as religious professionals have returned from their vacations and study leaves, they tell me they're already crispy, already tired, already burned out on a church year that hasn't even started yet. Burned out. It's an all too familiar feeling, isn't it? We are not all right. And there's no fighting it, since there is insufficient reassurance that anyone is in charge or has a plan or has anything at all under control. So what do? Well, first, we wait. We stop. We still ourselves. All our hollering and fussing and scrambling and trying to control what we can't control just makes it worse. So instead, we should make space to stop, to be still, to give thanks, and most of all, to listen to the lessons this time is offering. Listen to the wisdom of our inner teachers. Listen to the people and the things that remind us of possibility and hope. And then we should give up hope. Now, I don't mean that we should become hopeless, because that's not helpful. Instead, giving up hope is about reorienting what our hope is focused on. Give up hope for a better past. Let me repeat that. Give up hope for a better past. Give up hope that we will ever control the uncontrollable. Instead, focus on acceptance of what is, knowing that hope comes from the place where the hurt comes. Notice the ways that you have changed, that your world has changed, and more. Notice and do the small things you can control that are loving and affirming and liberating. And maybe notice too when you've been a jerk and need to come back into covenant and into relationship. What helps us here is keeping the faith, keeping your faith, keeping our Unitarian Universalist faith. Remembering, as the psalmist writes, joy cometh in the morning. Sure, we aren't sure when morning is, so keeping the faith is also about finding peace and love and insight in the in-between, seeing the possibilities, finding, as psychologist Dina Glauberman writes, the joy of burnout. We have no real control over so much that keeps us in this interminable third quarter. So let us do what we can to honor our exhaustion, notice our anxieties, hold our hurts, and let hope come.
Hope comes from the place where the hurt comes. I said, hope comes from the place where the hurt comes. I said, hope comes from the place where the hurt comes. I said, hope comes from the place where the hurt comes. I said, hope comes from the place where the hurt comes. I said, hope comes from the place where the hurt comes. I said, hope comes from the place where the hurt comes. I said, hope comes from the place where the hurt comes. The part of you that is not alright, yeah, is also the part that loves the light. And the part of you that is suffering is the part that calls in change. And you don't have to feel ashamed. There is nothing to forgive. The part of you that is crying out is the part that wants to live. Yeah, hope comes from the place where the hurt comes. I said, hope comes from the place where the hurt comes. I said, hope comes from the place where the hurt comes. I said, hope comes from the place where the hurt comes. When your world is burning down, well, getting hot is a sane reaction, but one in need of action, because your spirit needs protection. So gather up your sinew and gather up your faction. Hope is not a feeling, hope is an action. I said, hope comes from the place where the hurt comes. I said, hope comes from the place where the hurt comes. I said, hope comes. We are not all right. I said, hope comes. We are not all right. I'm gonna fall down on my knees. That's not living. I'm gonna say, will you help me please? That's not living. I'm gonna say I'm not all right. That's not living. I'm just trying to make it through this night. Yeah. That's not living. I'm gonna fall down on my knees. Yeah. Oh, will we say, help me please? Help me please. We can say, hey, we are not all right. We are not all right. We can help each other get through the night. Because hope comes from the center of the hurt, in the middle of the dirt. We'll plant a seed and watch it grow into something we don't already know.
Hope comes from the place where the hurt comes. So what's that look like? Granted, a lot of us are burned out. Granted, we should give up hope for a better past. Granted, obviously, that this is not how we imagined starting the year together. Granted that on top of the pandemic that has me and Bob and Bill sitting here in a mostly empty room, there's plenty else going on in the world. From images of evacuations in Afghanistan to our very own religious extremists writing policy just down the road in Texas. Hope comes from the place where the hurt comes. And then Gretchen Haley, as we started our service, writes, offering all of it for the good, for the common good, which is not a forgotten idea. Unitarian Universalism is many things in many places. In the church that I grew up, I thought of it as an anti-war faith. In the congregation that I am a member of in Baltimore, it is a place of resistance, loud resistance, to the forces that have kept that city segregated and depressed for generations. What is the Unitarian Church of Lincoln? What are we to be in this moment of extraordinary stress in the world? I think that this is a place where the good, where the common good, is not a forgotten idea. Hope comes from the place where the hurt comes, right? The hurt for me these days, the reason I'm plenty close to crispy at the start of a congregational year, instead of bouncing off the walls with new ideas, it's the collapse of the common good over the last 2 years. What is a pandemic but a challenge for collective action, an invitation to work for the common good. So watching cases increase this summer, hospitalizations and deaths that could have been prevented, but weren't. Because plenty of folks in the state have rejected their obligations for the common good for temporary individual comfort. That is maddening. But I know that's not who we are in this place, in this community, whether in person or on YouTube. If hope comes from the place where the hurt comes, then hope is this. The Unitarian Church of Lincoln is a place where we not only remember the common good, but we talk about it and we practice it. This is a community that shows up for each other. We talked about the church's discretionary fund earlier. We show up for the broader community every time there's an event out in Lincoln. When the pandemic hit, our members didn't actually say much, but they did start sewing masks. One of our families for years now has been the driving force behind little free pantries throughout the city. Members of this place are civically engaged, serving in roles that are volunteer appointed or elected to make this a kinder, more resilient city. The common good has never been forgotten here. It is tangible every time we gather. So that's what we're going to keep doing. A few years ago, Reverend Cheryl Walker preached at General Assembly. And it's worth quoting at length this morning. She said, "A while ago, I came across a post that made me laugh out loud. It was entitled, 'Badly Describe Your Profession.' And some of my esteemed colleagues who apparently also needed a good laugh posted some fine responses. Here are a few of them. Their names won't be used so as to protect the guilty. Once a week, I talk about stuff that I'm interested in, and I get mad if everybody doesn't come to listen. The rest of the time, I worry about money. I patrol the parking lot, making sure not one is parked in the spot reserved for the minister. I get paid to keep my head in the clouds and make changes at an incredibly slow pace. I also remove melted wax from many surfaces. My salary is decent, but I also receive compensation in the form of cookies, endless newspaper clippings, and homemade jars of jam. I talk for an hour a week, but into other people's personal lives, and go to meetings about creating more meetings. On Sunday, I tell people they can make the world a better place. When things don't improve that week, I repeat myself. There is some truth in each of these responses, she went on to say. I think the greatest truth is the last one. We tell people they can make the world a better place, and we repeat ourselves. And we'll keep repeating ourselves over and over and over again, because if we don't believe we could make the world a better place, I suspect most clergy, religious educators, and musicians, administrators, membership coordinators, any religious professional would give up this endeavor called Unitarian Universalist ministry. We repeat ourselves week after week, and we hope, we pray, that someone is actually listening, that someone will actually be impacted by our words, that we are actually making a difference. I think that every person who answers their life's calling does so with the intent of making a difference. It's not just ministers who listen to what their lives are calling them to do. We ministers may act like we're the only ones who receive the call, but that isn't at all true. Many people hear a call in their hearts and minds and souls. All of us can. And when we answer the call, we make a vow that we shall follow it through to the end. We may make that vow to the Lord, to God, to the goddess, to the universe, to humanity, to whatever it is that put that call in our hearts. We make a vow to make a difference and follow it through to the end. A better world is possible because the common good is not a forgotten idea. This is what I intend to repeat all year, and it will inform our actions. We aren't holding this service online this morning because we are afraid of getting sick. Plenty of us are vaccinated, and the breakthrough infections that we've seen have been mostly manageable. We're holding this service online because there is no more hospital capacity in Lancaster County at this moment. And we will not add to the burden of the community. We will wear masks. We will get vaccinated. We will preach hope and interconnection, not because we're afraid of what will happen if we do not, but because here, the common good is not a forgotten idea. Welcome to this new church here. Welcome back to this community of life-saving faith. Welcome back to this place where we repeat ourselves. Amen. we extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of love, or the fire of commitment. These we carry with us until we are together again. Be at peace, beloveds, and amen. That ends our worship service for this Sunday morning, assuming, as seems likely, we will continue to be in the orange on the county's risk dial next week. We will be again gathered on this YouTube channel at 10 o'clock next Sunday morning. We'll see you all there.